Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Si cette 4e édition de Médias en Seine a pour titre Habiter un monde commun, c'est évidemment parce que la crise sanitaire nous a temporairement séparés, mais aussi parce que notre capacité à nous entendre, à discuter, à faire société au fond, semble être mise à mal. C'est particulièrement visible aux États-Unis, où se côtoient deux visions du monde qui semblent presque irréconciliables, à tel point que le 6 janvier, des partisans de Donald Trump ont envahi le Congrès, considérant la victoire de Joe Biden comme illégitime, causant 5 morts. Populisme revendiqué, vision biaisée de l'histoire, utilisation de fake news, polarisation médiatique et lassitude démocratique, les inquiétudes et les ingrédients de la division américaine sont déjà observables en France en cette année électorale. Nous avons donc voulu avoir le témoignage et l'analyse d'un des journalistes les plus célèbres et les plus respectés des États-Unis. Il est l'un des visages de CNN. Au long de sa carrière de reporter, puis de présentateur, il a gagné pas moins de 18 Emmy Awards, la plus prestigieuse distinction de la télévision américaine. Pour le compte de la chaîne, il a évidemment couvert les plus importants événements de ces 20 dernières années. Il a interviewé les plus grands, de Bill Gates à Barack Obama, en passant évidemment par Lady Gaga et Gérard Depardieu. Il fut l'un des modérateurs du dernier débat présidentiel aux États-Unis. Depuis 2003, il présente l'une des émissions phares de CNN qui s'appelle Anderson Cooper 360, Anderson Cooper 360 degrés. Médias en Scène a aujourd'hui l'honneur d'accueillir Monsieur Anderson Cooper. Mr. Cooper, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
I just want to start with what could be maybe just a personal question. In your career, you've covered war zones from Bosnia to Nigeria. You've reported from Sri Lanka right after the tsunami, or Haiti after the 2010 earthquake. You've seen some of the worst action that can happen out there in the world. How did you feel covering the January 6th riot in Washington?
I was on set. It was during our election coverage, so it was a big day in the United States, obviously because of the certification of the vote, which was taking place. So we were all. I wasn't in DC. I was gathered in on set in New York, watching it on screen, and then obviously covering it that way. It was stunning to see. I mean, it was horrific. I have seen, as you said, I've been a lot of places. I've been in a lot of societies that have fallen apart. I was in Sarajevo during the war in Bosnia, off and on. I've been in Rwanda since I was a teenager, going back and forth to Rwanda. I was there briefly during the genocide. South Africa in the follow-up, in the run-up to the Mandela election. So I've seen societies fray. I just didn't expect to see this at
home.
Even given what we've been through over the last in the prior administration, it was still shocking to see, people who claim to be patriots, people who claim to support the police, run a riot in the Capitol, in the seat of democracy. That has never happened in the United States.
This was indeed sort of the ultimate sign, right, of the political breakup, could we say, of the United States, of at least such a political divide that it really tears people apart. It tears the fabric of democracy apart, it seems. But it's also an informational one, right? People just don't seem to have the same view. Opinions can differ, but now it seems like they're viewing a different world. And although it's easy to blame social networks, I'm sure media companies might have a role, or at least, some responsibility to it. And in France, when we think about this, we tend to look to Fox News and its hyper opinionated coverage of the news. But what about your network? What about CNN? Do you think it had a responsibility in the way it covered elections ever since, in the way it got maybe a bit more opinionated? What is your opinion on the responsibility of your channel?
Well, I think in the United States, I'm not that familiar with, I go to France a lot, but I'm not that familiar with news, television news in France. But in the United States, we have seen a shift over the decades, especially in cable, to more opinionated coverage. CNN has tried, I think, more than anybody, to hew to a more traditional model of kind of trying to be middle of the road, having people from different sides of the political aisle on to discuss things. That's always been the goal for CNN, and it's what we did for much of the Trump administration, particularly early on. Certainly what I found, I'll just speak for myself, what I found on my broadcast is gradually the people who were there representing the former president early on in his administration, it became clear that over time, they were increasing. We went through a lot of different ones because a lot of them were just very loose with facts and loose with the truth. And as the former president was himself, and it took us a while to kind of figure out, wait a minute, that we cannot just have, that these are not necessarily actors who are rational in terms of, or kind of hewing to various standards that we would expect, that at least usually the people we have on who have a difference of opinion, at the very least, they are fact-based. Many of the people who we started to have on were not. And ultimately, we realized they can't be on the program anymore. I don't want to speak to people who are not, I like differences of opinions. I don't want to have a show that people are shouting. I'm not interested in that. I know a lot of networks do in the United States. I'm interested in an actual discussion, but in order to have an actual discussion, you have to have people who are willing to at least speak honestly, even if they have a different opinion. And that became increasingly more difficult to find for people who represented the Trump administration. And certainly the former president, is the amount of lies he has told it's extraordinary and continues to. I mean, today he put out another statement that's just absurd. But it is not our tradition to automatically call the president of the United States a liar in this country. Usually it's, lying implies intent, and it's hard to gauge someone's intent, but not with the former president over time. And it took us a while, I think, to adapt and figure out this new normal of people who are not just simply shading the truth, but just completely lying about things and lying to each other.
Right, and so how did you do that? Because you just mentioned some of the lies. I mean, how do you cover a president who denies reality, call the press the enemy of the people, and then advise people that to drink bleach because it could cure COVID? How do you, journalistically, how do you cover this? How do you say, well, today the president just said we should maybe drink bleach?
Yeah, he actually said that he was suggesting that the U.S. government might want to experiment on injecting bleach into people, just for clarity's sake.
Right.
Just as bad, but maybe even worse, because he was talking about scientific experiments on human beings run by the U.S. government
with bleach.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was serious about it, and then lied about, of course, the lie, because he then had to say that he was being sarcastic. You can get. It is a difficult thing, and I think you in France are going to be increasingly dealing with this if you aren't, or I think you already are in many ways. But I think this is going to be something. This is now the playbook for autocrats, for despots, for shady characters around the world, to simply state an alternate reality, to simply state things which are not true, and either rely on the news person not having done their homework and know that what they're saying is not true, rely on the fact that they probably won't be talking to people from reputable news organizations who actually would ask tough questions of people regardless of their politics, and only stick with media that represents their interests and has a vested interest in seeing that person succeed. So this is something I think that is now going global, the kind of the Trump model. We've seen it obviously in Brazil, Bolsonaro. I've been following some of the folks you now are popping up in France and have been for a while. But I think that's going to be increasing. You can spend, as a reporter, you can spend all your time, especially if you're on television and this is happening live, correcting and stating what you have just said is not true. This is the fact. What you've just said now is not true. Here is the fact. And you can spend all your time doing that, and you would never get through an interview. So you have to, at a certain point, point out that it's not factually correct what the person is saying, that it's a lie, or it's just not factually correct, or they've shaded the truth. But you have to, at a certain point, also just not pretend as though what is happening is normal. You have to point out constantly how abnormal this is, because over time, what a person like the former president depends on is, because he is shameless, he will wear everyone else around him down, because he is willing to repeat over and over and over completely ludicrous and bald-faced and dangerous lies. And where someone else might have a sense of shame about it, he has none. And so it just wears you down. And ultimately, what he depends on, is just exhausting everybody around him. And just finally you give up and say, all right, fine, whatever, just fine. And as a reporter, you cannot do that. But it is exhausting, and it is really challenging to figure out, how to proceed in this. All the regular rules kind of don't apply, because you suddenly now have, we now have a party in the United States which is now hewing to a lie about the former election and continuing to propagate that lie.
And does taking, not the lies, but the position and the attitude, does taking it seriously help? When Donald Trump announced that he would run for president, he was sort of dismissed, right? I mean, the candidacy was not taken for serious by many news organizations, and yet it sort of fed on to this, saying, if the media don't like me, then it's because I'm on the people's side. So what would you have done differently? You just mentioned the playbook. And as you said, I'm asking this because we're in France entering a tense, very tense electional year. We have a high-profile right-wing media populist as a potential candidate. He does not like the media, although he lives from them. So in a way, I'm sort of asking for a friend there. What would you do differently?
I would, it is an incredibly difficult thing, because if you don't take the person seriously, then you allow their lies to just spread unchecked. If you do take them seriously and you challenge them and give them airtime, then you will be attacked for giving this person airtime. And, even if you are pushing back on that person, the person's followers will like the fact that they are challenging you and you are having a contentious argument with them. So regardless, it sort of helps them. I think, and I don't know, every case is different, but I know of some of the players that you will be facing, who are very TV savvy and very Trump-like in many ways. I think all you can do is continue to point out what is true and what is not true, because the problem is, even if you do that, you start, because this person is lying so egregiously, or so what they're saying is so inflammatory, and you are addressing it, it elevates that person, and you can't. And by continually pointing out that they are lying, you look like, just by doing your job of pointing out what is true and what's not, you end up looking like a partisan, and you get dismissed as, oh, well, you're just part of this left-wing conspiracy, or whatever the side of the aisle it is. And it's a very difficult thing. You get dismissed. The only thing you can do is continue, as a reporter, is to continually show yourself to be tough on all sides, to ask tough questions to all candidates, to be fair, and yet to try to hold a line and hope that there's enough people out there who want factual information and want to be able to just make up their own minds based on factual information. But it's not easy.
It's not easy, and you mentioned something extremely important, right? It's not just about the persona you're facing, because, as you said, Trump-like figures will dismiss the press and will probably challenge them. It's about their base, right? You interviewed a former QAnon supporter on your show who admitted that he genuinely believed that you ate babies.
Yep.
How do you engage with such an audience? Again, this idea of challenging people might sort of make them feel more comfortable in their views. My question there is actually, can journalism sort of mend that informational divide?
I'm not sure. I really don't know. I mean, I think I've been QAnon is a fascinating example. I mean, it defies all logic. It defies any rational thing. It's based on age-old anti-Semitic tropes, anti-Catholic tropes. It, is widespread. I know you've had some incidents in France related to it. It's hard to gauge how powerful it is, but do you make fun of it? Do you kind of dismiss it? Do you confront people about it? It's like putting neo-Nazis on television. It's not something I do because neo-Nazis benefit anytime they go on television. They want to be on television because even if they're made to look like jerks to 99% of the population, that 1% is going to look them up and Google them and try to reach out to them, and it's going to appeal to them. So you're giving them what they want by giving them airtime. In the case of the two QAnon people that I've spoken to, one was somebody who had renounced it and, very specifically kind of, I found it interesting that they thought that I ate babies and was a lizard person and, all these QAnon beliefs. Somebody else actually reached out to me telling me that I was going to be executed on a particular day over Instagram. And I ended up reaching out to him because he looked normal in his life on Instagram. And I ended up talking to him about this over online because and on television over Skype, because I felt just like, let's actually drill down with an actual human being who has a family who actually believes this stuff. And there's no convincing them. But it's, it is an interesting window into that. I just think you have to, I think it's different. I think you kind of have to like feel it out. I don't think it's something you can have a hard and fast rule about. We are never going to have any of these people, we're never going to talk with them directly because, they have they have lots of followers and there's a lot of people who believe them. And by you shutting them out, it sort of just validates what they're saying. So I think in the face of, the potential for tyranny and in the face of polarization, from a reporting standpoint, all you can do is try to bridge that divide by just being honest yourself and being fair and being a person of, good character who's trying genuinely to report on what is happening and ask people, fair questions and listen to people and hear what they have to say. I don't know that it works. I mean, I at times there's days I just feel like we're, not that. I mean, truth gets stripped away very, very quickly. General Michael Hayden, a former head of the NSA and CIA in the United States, has said that there's a thin veneer of civilization, and we've seen that in Sarajevo. I've seen that in Rwanda. I've seen it in places where the lights go out, the electricity goes out, and very quickly people begin to change and turn on each other. And we've seen that in the United States now for quite some time, and it can happen again. I mean, there's the former president may run again. And there's the Republican Party is still kowtowing to him, still kissing his ring, and still pushing this lie that is completely not based in fact.
So what I'm hearing is that the election of President Biden really did not sort of calm the situation. Are journalists still being targeted, or are journalists still being threatened for doing their work in the United States?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah. I mean, I've never, I mean, I've had security overseas in Afghanistan or Iraq when I go, for a long time. I didn't have it, but I, started in war zones to occasionally have security because I'm relatively recognized. I don't blend in. I'm like the palest person on the planet. But in the United States now, just I'll speak for myself. I get threats and have had to alter my patterns of movement and how I travel and how I'm very aware of security issues, which I was never I would be aware of when I was traveling in a war zone. But it's definitely changed things. People feel emboldened to not just not like you, but emboldened to hurl insults at you, to physically accost you. And we see this on all sides of the political aisle. there is this stripping away of norms, and that was the specialty of the former president. I mean, that's one of the reasons he was elected. He was strict, he didn't have respect for those institutions, he didn't have respect for norms. But the norms, turns out, all of our free and democratic societies are off. A lot of it is based on just norms. It's not based on laws that are codified. It's not based on institutions that are firmly in bedrock. It's norms of behavior and norms of just belief. And when that is attacked, that is a very hard thing to fight against.
And so, what's the drive? What drives you after all these years in this tense situation, in a context which is ever evolving? What's your drive to get up every morning and report to people who might think that you're eating babies? Why do you still go out there?
Yeah, I believe in what we do. There's a lot of things I don't like about it. I don't like the television landscape and cable news. I don't like people who have TV shows and yell and wear their opinion on their sleeve and try to, force it down people's throats on the left and the right. That's not something I'm interested in doing. But to me, it's the greatest privilege to be invited into somebody's home, and literally invited to somebody's home, to go to, to go to Paris after the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, and be invited into somebody's home who's been through a terrible experience, but who wants to, make sense of it, and who wants to tell you what happened. And they want, people want to know that, when terrible things are happening to people, when in Somalia in the famine, people who were dying on the side of the road, people who had lost their children to starvation or civil war, they want you to know who their child is. They want you to know the name of their child. They don't have a photograph of their child because, in Somalia then in 92, most people wouldn't have a photograph of a child in their family because they couldn't afford it. They didn't have access to it. But they want somebody to recognize the horror of what is happening. And I think it's important that, whether or not people are listening, whether or not people are watching you on television, I don't look at ratings, the ratings of my television show. I'm doing what I do because I believe that it's important. If everything's going to go to crap and society is going to become unrecognizable to us, I think good people need to stand up and talk to each other and understand each other and be good people. And I think that's important, because in the end, there's nothing you can really do, to make a global change or to change an entire society. You can control your own actions. You control who you are. You control how you interact with people and how you treat other people. And you can control, I also believe in the value of storytelling. I've survived in my life through traumatic events because of other people's stories and other people telling me how they survived. And that helped me. And I think it helps for us to know one another and to walk in each other's shoes, even if, we don't like the person or we think they're so different from us. I think there's tremendous value in walking in someone else's shoes, even now, even if no one really wants to do it or no one wants to watch it. I think it's important. And I think it's important to bear witness to what is happening. No one should die in silence. No democracy should not, the Washington Post,
Democracy
has
dies
a
in
slogan,
silence.
democracy should not die in silence, and people should, I'm not saying take up arms, I'm saying just stand up and be a decent person and talk about what's important.
So, from what I gather, being a journalist is not letting democracy die in darkness. Is that your final point?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like, again, that's a Washington Post slogan,
Sure.
but yeah, it's bearing witness. It's bearing witness to, I used to think of bearing witness as bearing witness to what's happening in faraway places that people aren't paying attention to. I think of bearing witness as bearing witness to what is happening here right now. And you're bearing witness to what is going to be happening in France in the coming months and years. And that's important. And whether people listen or not, I can't control that. But I can control what I say about it and what I cover and who I talk to and how I treat them.
Well, we don't know if people will be listening either, but we can tell you that we'll be there trying to do the same job. Mr. Cooper, I would love to stay, and actually I would love for you to stay and be with our next guest, because she's also on the fault lines of democracies. It's Maggie Haberman from the New York Times,
Sure.
who has reported extensively on the Trump administration.
Really?
But I do know that you have a very, very tight schedule. So thank you very much for taking the time to be with us here at Médias en Seine. Quant à vous, mesdames et messieurs, si la politique américaine vous intéresse et si vous voulez savoir aussi comment on peut couvrir l'administration Trump, je vous invite à rester avec nous, puisque dans quelques minutes, Lucas Manget reçoit Maggie Haberman, journaliste au New York Times, qui a reçu le prix Pulitzer pour sa participation à la couverture de l'administration Trump. Donc, restez avec nous, à tout de suite.